so much for taking time out of your day to join us for this webinar on the ASI standards revision process. As we start, we always start with a shout out to our antitrust compliance policy knowledge here at ASI that we bring together folks that normally operate in a competitive environment and always want to be cognizant of international antitrust compliance law. I think in this call today, we're pretty low risk, but do always want to make sure that we're cognizant and keep it in the back of our mind that we need to be in compliance with all of the regulations. And want to do a second acknowledgement of Indigenous people and their connections to their traditional lands, both where we and our members operate. I'm speaking to you today from unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa, Canada. And here at ASI, we aim to respect cultural heritage, customs, beliefs of all the Indigenous peoples, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So let's jump in. Starting kind of looking at this at a really high level, the ASI Standards Revision Terms of Reference is a document that we're required to have by ISEAL, and it's a document that outlines the process for our standards revision. ASI is required to revise our standard minimally every 5 years. That's our own internal process. For this standard revision cycle, we set the cycle at 4 years due to an unresolved issue around biodiversity and ecosystem services from the last round of revisions. So for those of you who have been with ASI on the journey thus far, you may recall that we launched our standards in December of 2017. So we're starting this round of revisions now so that we have time to launch hopefully a new standard within 4 years of that, so December 2021. The process for the revision is governed by the ASI standards setting procedure, and that process is available on our website if anybody is looking for additional reading. So the terms of reference, the objective, as I said before, having a terms of reference is an ISEAL requirement, and it's also just great practice. The goal of our terms of reference specifically, so this document specifically, is to describe the steps in the standards revision process and to identify opportunities for folks like yourself to contribute to that process. Secondly, it's to describe the decision-making processes, so how we make decisions throughout this process between now and our next standard. To outline the scope of the revision, and then additionally to provide clear social, environmental, and economic outcomes, and to delineate potential unintended effects of the certification system. So today on this call, we're specifically looking at the first 3 objectives, and note that the 4th and the 5th are in detail in the document, but today we're really focusing on the first 3 in this call. So really, to sum it all up, the purpose of the standards revision terms of reference is to ensure that everyone involved in the revision has a voice in defining the process and how to engage, and also that everybody is aware that we're doing a standards revision, but also how they can engage. As a person who believes strongly in collaboration, it would be the worst thing ever if we got through a process that people came in late and weren't even aware that it was existing. So in addition to giving us guideposts for how we're going to conduct ourselves, it really is a document to spread the word that we're doing this process and this is how folks can engage. We've created a special web page on the ASI website. The terms of reference are available on that website, and that's also where you'll find this webinar after the call. So according to ISEAL, and as is good practice, we're going to consult on these terms of reference for 2 months, commencing in early April. So we sent out the announcement about the standards revision process and these draft terms of reference last week, and we're going to be accepting input on the terms of reference until the 9th of June 2020. So I just really want to be clear that kind of this consultation period is specifically on the terms of reference for the revision, but we'll see again later that this isn't the only consultation period in the standard. So there are 3 consultation periods, and the scope, the purpose of this one is really this terms of reference. So we're going to be receiving input, and essentially we are happy to receive input any way that you're happy to give it to us. And then all of that input is going to be compiled by us here at the ASI Secretariat, It's going to be reviewed by the Standards Committee, and then any revisions that need to be made to the terms of reference will be made, and the document will be finalized. The input received and the ASI response will be shared publicly on our ASI website, so the same link that you saw on the previous slide. We'll share it via our newsletter, and we'll email it directly to anyone who may have commented to us on the terms of reference, but who might not be on our newsletter. So our goal is that anybody who gives us a comment or input or feedback on our terms of reference will get a response so that they know how we responded to that feedback. So after we go through this process, we'll finalize the terms of reference. And then these terms of reference will be the guidelines that we'll abide by that define the process and the scope of the standard revision. So here, I've taken this directly out of the terms of reference, and you'll see the reference in the top left corner there in green underneath the title, so that if you're going back and you want to see where this information's come from, you can find it on page 1. And I've done that through the rest of the slides where I've pulled the information from the terms of reference, so you know where it came from. But the gist here is that in this standards revision, we're looking at all 6 key ASI documents. So for those of you who are familiar with ASI, these are the really key documents that drive the work that we do. It's the ASI performance standard that's applied to all certified facilities in the ASI system. The corresponding standard guidance system, so the guidance that guides auditors and members as they implement the ASI performance standard. Similarly, the ASI chain of custody standard, so that's the standard that controls or delineates how material is passed between ASI certified members, and also how ASI or how material is accepted as being ASI certified. So that's all outlined in the chain of custody standard, and there's a corresponding guidance document there. There's also the ASI assurance manual, which as a past auditor is my favorite document. And the assurance manual documents how ASI verifies verifies the implementation of the ASI system by ASI members. So it talks a lot about the self-assessment process by members, and also the audit process by ASI auditors. And last but certainly not least, the claims guide, the ASI claims guide, is in scope. And the claims guide is the document that talks about the claims that companies can make relative to their certifications. So really, it's the whole ASI system, these are the key documents, is up for revision in the standard. And the goal is for those 6 documents to clarify and improve ASI's program. The main focus of that clarification improvement is both implementation experience and identified improvement areas that we've had with our members as we've gone through the last 2.25 years of implementation with the standard. We have stakeholder feedback and evolving expectations. So as those of you who've been involved with ASI for a long time may remember, version 1 of our performance standard was published in 2014. That standard underwent a minor revision prior to 2017, but some of the key critical clauses haven't been really explored deeply since 2014. So for instance, greenhouse gas emissions hasn't been looked at deeply since 2014. And certainly in many of those fields, there's evolving expectations over the last 6 years. And we're also looking at clarifying and improving the system based on good practice approaches and certification programs and data governance. And as I said earlier, the goal is to have all of this finalized by December 2021. So here we're going to look at, from a high level, how ASI makes decisions and how the process runs. So on the left side, you have the ASI Secretariat. That's me and my co-workers here at ASI. We do a lot of the technical drafting. We manage the processes, we organize the meetings, we bring folks together, we put together the packages, and we keep track of the website and the records, but we're not the decision-making body. The decision-making body in this system is in the middle here in this gray box, and that's the ASI Standards Committee. That committee is elected on a 2-year term, and we just underwent elections in early 2020, so it's a new standards committee that's come on board. And that the Standards Committee reviews draft inputs and consultations, and they have the arduous job of approving the final content. Now, there's several different input into the Standards Committee. One is public consultation processes, similar to this one. And as I said earlier, that there's going to be 2 public consultations in addition to this one on the terms of reference. So throughout the process, the Standards Committee will review and approve different changes to the standard. Those changes are going to go out to the public for comment twice over the next year and a half. So all of that input will be reviewed by the Standards Committee, and similar to what we're doing in this consultation round on the terms of reference, there will be a similar process of reviewing all of the comments that come in and then responding publicly to the individuals which have made comments. The second input there is ASI has an Indigenous Peoples Advisory Forum, which is made up of Indigenous folks from around the world who contribute a lot of their time and expertise into ASI. They're meeting this year virtually, but they will be looking at all of the language proposed and provide their input to the ASI Standards Committee. We also have working groups that provide technical input. We have 6 working groups right now looking at different areas of expertise. And these working groups provide technical expertise to the ASI Standards Committee, and they'll do a deep dive on one particular topic. So for instance, we have a greenhouse gas working group, a human rights working group, biodiversity and ecosystems working group, etc. The working groups are open to all folks. If there's an area that's of interest to you, you can write me and I'll add you to the distribution list for those working groups. And they operate on the same consensus decision-making processes as the Standards Committee. Now, the working group isn't a decision-making group, but they do make recommendations to the Standards Committee, and then it's up to the Standards Committee to determine whether or not to accept those recommendations as they go ahead. We also have a legal committee. This is a committee of the board, but that committee reviews all of our drafts both before they go out for consultation and before they go to the board for final approval to ensure that there is no legal complication in what we're proposing. Now, the last step that you're going to see in this process, after all of those folks in the middle have done their work, you have the ASI board. The ASI board is going to review the process, the material risks to ASI, including any legal risks that have been put forth by the legal committee. And if there are no identified material risks to ASI, they'll adopt the new and revised standards. So even though it is the ASI board that adopts the standard, it's really critical to note the content of the standard lies really with the Standards Committee in the middle. So the Standard Committee approves the content, and as long as the process is sound, it's adopted by the board. So all of that's going to be happening over the next 2 years. We've already actually started at the very beginning of 2020 with the development of this draft terms of reference that we put out for consultation, but we've also busily been already starting to revise documents, trying to get everything ready for our next consultation. So here we are, kind of Q2 2020, in the middle of this consultation on the terms of reference. We're going to review that feedback that we get. We'll finalize those at the end of this consultation period. And then that'll govern the rest of our revision period through to the end of 2021. What's really critical to note, and that I've mentioned a couple of times, is that there are these 2 additional consultations. So even though specifically we're talking about the terms of reference and frameworking for the revision, there are going to be 2 consultation periods next year, a 60-day at the beginning of 2021, and then a 30-day later in 2021, where any stakeholder that has an interest in the ASI standards are going to be able to provide your feedback on the specific changes that are being made. So in this round, for instance, we're not necessarily looking for, what is the answer to the greenhouse gas question, though you're certainly certainly possible for you to suggest one, but really we're asking for the topics, whereas in future consultations, we'll have a proposed solution to a question that was raised, and we'll be asking for feedback on the solution that we propose. And then on the far right there, as I've mentioned before, our target is that December 2021, we'll wrap up this process and we'll have a new set of ASI key documents that'll be ready to go out for implementation. So in terms of the basis of the standards revision, look to the ASI Theory of Change, and in specific, this set of goals that are outlined for us in the middle of our Theory of Change. And so while there are a number of topics on the agenda for the ASI standards revision for consideration, really a focus on kind of these 5 key areas that are recognized as being of high value and high impact in the aluminium value chain. So those 5 areas are the reduced climate change impact, enhanced waste management, enhanced biodiversity management, practices that implement business responsibility to respect human rights, and increased material stewardship by all actors in the aluminium value chain. So that's kind of always the background focus of what ASI does. But of course, it never stays as little as that list. In the terms of reference, we've given kind of this broad list of some of the broad scope topics that we're going to be looking at, including the assurance system clarifications, some clarifications also to the claims guide. We'll be looking a fair bit, and we have a working group on the chain of custody system. We'll be looking to align our standards with the LME due diligence processes that are also occurring at the same time as we're doing the standards revision. And then, the big one at the bottom here, we'll be looking at the sustainability requirements and the implementation guide. So kind of out of those 5 topics on the theory of change and those 7 bubbles, we have a log of over 200 topics that we're looking at already for this revision. I've listed here several of the big ones that'll be a really big discussion over this next year, but it's a really broad list already logged. These logged topics have come from implementation over the last 2 years. So some of them have come from our auditors who have had comments on the ASI system or some of the ASI criteria. Some of them have come from implementation. ASI members have implemented the standard and said, this or that, doesn't quite come across in implementation the way I remember it being, or there's a nuance that's missed. So as we've gotten those comments over the last 2.5 years, we have logged them, and all of those things are going to be looked at now in the next year. So our goal is between now and January of 2021, the ASI working groups and the ASI Standards Committee will have looked at all of these topics, all of these 200 topics, and we'll have a revised standard for you to look at and comment on in January 2021. So in terms of all of that, what we are seeking is your feedback on this terms of reference. And as I said at the beginning, we're really happy to get that feedback almost any way in which you're willing to give it to us. We would accept a submission by email. We have a comment form that's on our website that asks some specific questions that we would kind of to prompt conversation. But if you have any additional comments, there's a spot on that form for additional comments. If the form doesn't work for you, you can just write into us in a letter, an email, kind of what your thoughts are, and we will log those for consideration. This webinar is an opportunity if you have any questions. And we'd also talked about presentations, workshops, or meetings. Of course, those will all be online. But if at any point anything comes up, happy to get your comments as we go about our work here at ASI. And then lastly, if you'd actually like to speak directly to one of us, we're always happy to do that. It's nice sometimes just to talk one-to-one and understand the depth of an issue. So really, in whichever way works best for you, we're happy to get your thoughts. I just mentioned that there are several questions in our comment forms, some topics that we're specifically looking for feedback on. And I've just listed those here for you. Really, they're just kind of meant as points of thought. It's no expectation that everybody has to answer every question, but really just some things that we would really like to know as we go into the standard revision ourselves. So lots of time for questions, but I'll hand it over to you guys if you have any questions.
Which bits we would get to consult on when? Would you be able to run over that just full time? Sorry, thank you, Krista.
So over this period here, from kind of all of 2020, internally, the Secretariat and the Standards Committee and the working groups are all working on the log of items we have and any items that'll come in from this round of consultation. And then the working group will send out revised language. So let's say the topic is, legal compliance, and somebody wants to include a different international law. And the Standards Committee says, yes, we'll do that. Then we would put out for consultation in January of 2021. The new standard says international law. What do you think about that? So right now we're really gathering topics, and then the working group and the Standards Committee and IPAF are working through those, and then kind of comments on specific topics will be coming out for 2021. Now, that being said, if anybody wanted to talk, happy to have folks participate in the working groups. If somebody had a passion for one of the topics, or to schedule a call with us, and we're happy to talk about that and feed that into the process at any time. So it's not to say that we'll only talk about revised language later, but that was kind of the process that we had laid out.
Okay, so for my members, as opposed to as the Australian Aluminium Council, as opposed to myself, so I'm involved in some of the working groups, but for my members, the main period where they would be having, I guess, greater input into the consultation would be in the first half of next year.
Exactly. Yeah.
Would you like not to prioritize maybe I mean, just saying so that it's a 2-year period instead of doing all the 5 together, we could maybe the performance and the COC or something like that, or so that we have some intermediate goalposts?
We had thought about different ways of doing it, and where we landed is that the 6 documents are so interconnected that when you talk about one, you almost inevitably talk about the other. So if we're talking about the performance standard and how and a criteria related to human rights, for instance, it very quickly leads to a question about how the auditors will verify that, and if our auditing rules are adequate. So certainly some systems delineated out, and we had thought about that. And in the end, we thought, it's a lot of work at once, but we have staff full-time dedicated to doing that at ASI. And that because it's so interconnected, we do it at once, both kind of for that reason, but also we don't want to be constantly in a revision process as well, so that we tire out our stakeholders, and then our members are always having to implement changes. So there's kind of there's a pro and a con to both approach, but our logic was that we have the capacity. We would give it a shot this time, doing it all at once.
Hi, thanks very much, Antonia here. I just have a very quick question on the decision-making process chart that you showed us, which seems very helpful and also demonstrates how comprehensive the process is, and congratulations for which. I was wondering if you could possibly expand a little bit on the decision-making process with regard to tackling and addressing divergent views and perspectives, and from personal experience, I know that can be quite challenging. So I was just wondering whether you have a process in place, or essentially this governance structure helps it kind of resolve those organically.
Many are resolved organically, but we are governed. Our governance handbook goes into a fair amount of detail in terms of how we make decisions. We do work on a consensus decision-making model, so we strive in all of our decisions, both in the working group and the standards committee, to have and the board, to have a consensus-based decision where all of the group can live with the outcome, and we define that as we give as much time and as much energy and as much research as we can to a topic in trying to achieve a consensus. If we've exhausted all of that, if we don't think time, research, or more discussion is going to bring us to consensus, we do have the option of having a vote, so that a decision will ultimately be made. But it's kind of our last resort. We do always try to achieve consensus, and for the most part, I think in the last round of revisions, I can only remember one thing that came to a vote. So for the most part, we work by consensus.